Hello all, this is James Johnson, aka Sulfurblade, and I am here to talk about the much anticipated, by some, Elder Scrolls 6, which is rumored to be known as Redfall, which in and of itself is news as the Redfall books have a trademark dispute with Bethesda, and there's a legal battle that Bethesda has been dragged into once again over the copyright and trademarks of the name Redfall itself. So there's that. But now let's jump into Elder Scrolls 6 and why I agree with Nico at Dare to Game that Elder Scrolls 6 is going to suck, and not just because it's the cool new fad, but because it's a trend that is, well, it's a continuation of what we already know. If you've been an Elder Scrolls fan, you already know what I'm about to talk about, but let's rehash it anyway. First off, I would like to recommend a video done by Indigo Gaming, and I'm going to put a link to that video down in the description of this video that can explain everything there is to ever know about the Elder Scrolls series, and it also kind of agrees with my sentiments about Elder Scrolls and why I think it's gone, well, in the wrong direction. And Indigo Gaming can actually explain the situation far better than I ever could. In fact, it's one of the best YouTube videos I've ever seen in my life. If you're especially familiar with Elder Scrolls, you're a big fan of it, you will enjoy the video. It's well worth a watch. Anyway, getting past that, let's go into why I think Elder Scrolls 6 is likely to, well, not be very enjoyable. And here's why. Oh, maybe I should rephrase that. Elder Scrolls 6 will not be as good as Skyrim. That is the safe thing to say. So let's be clear. I enjoyed Skyrim. So I have a feeling that I might be able to enjoy Elder Scrolls 6, but I know I will enjoy it less than Skyrim. Just like I enjoyed Skyrim, but I enjoyed it less than Oblivion. Just like I enjoyed Oblivion, which I enjoyed less than Morrowind. And just like I enjoyed Morrowind, which I enjoyed less than Daggerfall. Are we seeing a pattern here? My enjoyment factor just keeps decreasing with each new release of the Elder Scrolls franchise. And there's some very simple reasons for this, to be honest. Now, you may or may not have heard of Todd Howard. Todd Howard is kind of the lead game designer for Bethesda and Elder Scrolls in regards to everything coming after Daggerfall. So we're talking Morrowind, Oblivion, Skyrim, and of course the upcoming Elder Scrolls 6 will be in the purview of Todd Howard. Now, who was the real father of the Elder Scrolls franchise? Whose dream was Elder Scrolls? Why is it such an amazing thing? Well, that's Julian LeFay. Julian LeFay is the person who created the very first Elder Scrolls game, and subsequently not his final. Daggerfall was not his final Elder Scrolls game, but it was the pinnacle of Elder Scrolls games for Julian LeFay. It was his magnum opus, if you will. And really, Daggerfall is the magnum opus of Elder Scrolls. Granted, if you look at these pictures, you're going to see that Daggerfall's graphics are rather lacking and lackluster. And that is true. Compared to the newer games, Daggerfall is definitely suffering in the graphics department. But it doesn't suffer in the rest of the department. Daggerfall had all the right stuff, it just didn't have the new graphics. Where each subsequent child of Daggerfall has less Daggerfall. They've dumbed the game down with each release. Bethesda has a development theory and or policy and or they believe in dumbing games down. They believe in streamlining. They believe in generalizing. This is what Bethesda does. But that is not the only reason that Elder Scrolls 6 is going to suck. Obviously, Elder Scrolls 6 will be a dumbed down version of Skyrim, and I don't know how you dumb down Skyrim anymore than what Skyrim already was. It was pretty much as dumbed down of an Elder Scrolls game as I could envision, but I digress. Why has Bethesda gone in this route? Well, there is a big difference between Daggerfall and the rest of the games. Daggerfall was made out of complete and total passion by Julian LeFay. He has often made the remarks that the game almost killed him. When he was making Daggerfall, Bethesda was a small studio. It was not big. It wasn't incredibly profitable. It did not have a lot of employees. Daggerfall was pretty much his baby, and there were a couple of other people that were involved in the process, Todd Howard being one of them towards the tail end. But Todd Howard's impact on Daggerfall was kind of minor compared to Julian LeFay, who was there from the start to finish. And Julian LeFay had several programming assistants, if you will, who came and went during the process of making the game. Yes, that's right. Julian LeFay and one other person from the programming side made the complete entirety of Daggerfall. So Todd Howard was Julian LeFay's final programming partner. So there was always like two, a master and apprentice, if you would put it in Sith terms, making Daggerfall, which is very different from the follow-on games where Todd Howard had a lot more programming support to create Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim. Bethesda obviously became a larger company and had a lot more finances to hire on more individuals. Now, that's not to say that only two people made Daggerfall, because that wouldn't be fair to the artists, the storytellers, So there are more than programmers that make a game, but programmers make the guts of the game. And really, without the programmers, you don't have a game, right? So, from that aspect, Daggerfall was a huge undertaking. It was procedurally generated. It was the largest game universe to exist until recently, I believe. I think a couple of games recently, like what's the space game? Wow. Why isn't this coming to me? Uh, uh, the, the, this the space game that went. Uh, wow. I'm getting old, guys. You know the game I'm thinking of. It's procedurally generated space game that nobody was ever supposed to meet in it because it's just billions and billions of stars. Um, yeah, uh, it's one of those things when you can't think of the name of something, right? It'll come to me 5 minutes from now or 2 hours from now, but I'm not thinking of it at the point of my head. But you get the point. Daggerfall was a huge world and held the record as largest in-game world for a very, very long time because of its procedural generation that went into making it. Um, yeah, so that's the point I'm trying to make there. What's very different with the subsequent release of Morrowind? Morrowind was pretty much the smallest map um, of the works. Morrowind was tiny, so you went from huge to tiny. There was no comparison. The Morrowind is so minuscule compared to Daggerfall in size of geography that actually all the games are so small compared to Daggerfall. If you were to take Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim and put all of the maps together, it would only be like a fifth of the Daggerfall map. That's how much area Daggerfall encompassed. Daggerfall was gigantic, but much of it, as everyone knows that has played Daggerfall, is a lot of emptiness. Daggerfall was uh, procedurally generated, and part of that procedural generation generated a lot of nothing. That's not to say that there wasn't a lot of stuff. With a map that big, there were lots of towns, and the towns were big. They were very sizable. There were many people. Those people may have looked the same, and the houses may have looked the same. Because of how procedural generation works, it was still a big, alive, breathing world, whereas Morrowind was more like an artistic rendering of a tiny slice of the world. And as far as I'm concerned, I prefer the big, breathing world over the small artistic rendering. Not a fan of Todd Howard's approach to Elder Scrolls. Julian LeFay's approach. What he was trying to do with Daggerfall is he was trying to create the ultimate dungeon master. So he was a big fan of tabletop gaming, and he wanted to create a game where the game could serve as a dungeon master and could adapt to the player. That was the purpose of Daggerfall, is he wanted to make a game that could serve as the dungeon master for an RPG like experience and would adapt as the player progressed. So you were your story. Yes, Daggerfall did have a small main overarching story, but it had very little to do with your gameplay compared to the follow-on Elder Scrolls, where you had the main storyline and it was all so important, and you couldn't really get away from it. So Todd Howard's approach is is to, while he gives you a sandbox that you can move around in, he kind of forces the story into your view. There is it's a theme park like system. It's a story that is on rails, and it's fairly cleverly done. So of theme park RPG like games, Todd Howard does do a fairly decent job, but he doesn't continue on with the open-ended sandboxness approach that Julian LeFay did in Daggerfall. And that, to me, is the serious divergence that really starts to lead down the rabbit hole of the games not being what they could have been. If Todd Howard could have improved upon Daggerfall's ability to be the ultimate dungeon master and adapt to the player, and left the world open-ended and allowed for the player to create what he wanted out of his gaming experience, then you would really have the ultimate RPG game, which is what Daggerfall was attempting to be. The subsequent games after Daggerfall, they didn't attempt to do that. They attempted to, well, give you a story, give you lore, tell you what you were. You are the promised one. You are the Dovahkiin. You are the Dragonborn. You are the chosen one. So in all of Morrowind, Oblivion, Skyrim, and so forth, you end up on a very you end up on rails following a storyline that's very clear cut. Entertaining, engaging, yes, that's probably true, but very clear cut, very streamlined. Unlike Daggerfall, which didn't give you much of an overarching story, it was up to you to figure out what you were going to do with your game. I prefer the Daggerfall approach. Now, with that being said, what else has dumbed down through the course of history? Well, character creation for one, stats for another. I could list so many things, but I'm not going to, because if you've played these games, you already know this. You already know the games have been dumbed down. You already know that alchemy is nothing like it was in Daggerfall, and spellmaking was nothing like it was in Daggerfall. Wait, spellmaking? You don't even make spells anymore. You just pick up a scroll, and now you know the spell, where you physically made every attribute of the spell back in Daggerfall. If you wanted to make a fireball that had a duration of 5 seconds and an AoE of 2 feet, you could make it exactly like that. Or if you wanted a duration of 3 seconds with an area of effect of 7 feet, you could do that. Or you know, you get my point. In Daggerfall, alchemy was completely open-ended. You could make an unlimited amount of different potions based off of just trial and error. In the follow-on games, you had very specific recipes, and the number of recipes and specific recipes there were in each subsequent game kind of decreased, and it eventually, got very dumb. And, there's so many other things that we could talk about, but I'm not going to. Go watch Indigo Gaming if you want to find out about that. The main reason that we're going to have this discussion is actually the why. Why have these things changed? And it's more than just Julian LeFay and Todd Howard. While that's a simple way of looking at it, there is a reason Julian LeFay is no longer with Bethesda and Todd Howard is. Todd Howard has been very good for Bethesda's bank account. It's not to say that Julian LeFay didn't make a great game in Daggerfall. It's that Daggerfall was an expensive process. Putting that much passion and effort into a game for a specific amount of monetary award is not how giant game studios like Bethesda come to be. Giant game studios like Bethesda come to be because they're good at making money. So give a product that is digestible on as many platforms as you can, as simple as you can, without having to change your engine too much. We're seeing a pattern here. So Bethesda's oftentimes criticized as being buggy and using the same engine. Well, yeah, there's big reasons for that, because they are using the same engine. They are doing as minimal changes to that type of stuff because that makes money. The more you invest into the game, the less money you make. The more you can streamline the game and dumb it down, the easier it is to reproduce it and make a sequel and another offshoot and another offshoot, so that you can thus make money. And if you can make that game in half the time that Daggerfall was made, or a quarter of the time that Daggerfall was made, well, you're making even more money. And Todd Howard became very good at making money. The Elder Scrolls series is not the passion child that Daggerfall was. Daggerfall was Julian LeFay's dream. It was his magnum opus. He put his heart and soul and everything he had into making Daggerfall. The same cannot be said about Morrowind or Oblivion or Skyrim. These were not passion childs of Todd Howard. They were not his heart and soul. They were just a continuation of Julian LeFay's passion, done so in a way to make money. And that is really the big issue here. This is the reason that Bethesda is starting to get a black eye, is because, well, they inherited big names. Fallout, they were not the original creators of Fallout. And while they were the original creators of Elder Scrolls, nobody that worked on Daggerfall or the original games still exists, with the exception of Todd Howard, who, well, he was actually, I think, like the janitor or something, and he happened to have programming knowledge, and Julian LeFay actually lobbied to get him a job as a programmer, which is kind of comical. So, at the time, Daggerfall started production and Elder Scrolls was in existence, Todd Howard was in the company to, sweep the floors and clean the toilets. And now he's the guy who is the big programmer because, well, he's evidently got a good skill at minimalistic game design that maximizes profit. So, yeah, um, Bethesda has been very good at getting the most out of big titles that they could over the last few years. With Fallout, they've soaked up that title for all that they could. Elder Scrolls, they've been soaking up the Elder Scrolls for all that they can for quite some time. But the jig is starting to get up. They don't have the Julian LaFay in the closet anymore. They don't have somebody who has incredible passion and drive to make something new. They only have people that are capable of regurgitating stuff that's already been done. Right? They're not exactly good at making a new game engine. They're not exactly good at coming up with new ideas. These are not Bethesda's strong suits, and we're starting to see that come to fruition. Um, and this is the reason that Elder Scrolls 6 is, well, it's not going to be as good as Skyrim, because they don't have the heart, they don't have the soul, they don't have the desire to give you what we should have gotten by now. We should have gotten the continuation of Daggerfall. At this point, we should have a game world so huge and so beautiful with these new graphics, with a game that's able to adapt and transform to you, the player. We should have the ultimate dungeon master Julian LaFay was trying to make with Daggerfall, not the hand-tailored RPG experience that we get from Morrowind and Oblivion and Skyrim. And that's not to say that these were bad games. These were games of the year, and they were games of the year for good reason. But one is not the other. And while I appreciate Oblivion, and I appreciate Morrowind, and I appreciate Daggerfall, I appreciate, well, sorry, and I appreciate Skyrim, but I appreciate Daggerfall far more because of the drive, because of the scope, because of the ambition. Daggerfall was trying to create an RPG experience where anyone could drop into any character inside of the world at any time. Yes, a multiplayer RPG Daggerfall was created to be, but they couldn't figure it out. They couldn't work it out. They were doing things far ahead of their time. Well, those things are possible now. It's no longer far ahead of Daggerfall's time. If Julian LaFay had the tools that are available today to make Daggerfall what it could have been, well, it would have been glorious. And Bethesda's been sitting on this. They have the ability to make Daggerfall what it should be, but they've just failed to take advantage of that because it's too expensive. It's too expensive to make a dream game. It's too expensive to pour your heart and soul into a passion. Passions don't make money. Passions make the best games of all time, yes, but the best games of all time only make so much money. It's the sequels that come after the best games of all time that make money. It's the ability to regurgitate a sequel with as little effort as possible. So the bigger you make the game, the bigger the sequel has to be. The more effort it takes to make the sequel, and they've been trying hard to make each sequel as easy as possible by dumbing down each subsequent game. The sequel for Daggerfall will be rather easy. And then let's not even get started on the fact that they are limiting their capacities by trying to be multiple platform friendly. By trying to be able to be put on the Xbox and the PlayStation and the consoles of the world, you are limiting what the Elder Scrolls can be. And God forbid they lose out on the other places that they can generate revenue just to make a superior game. This is not what Bethesda does. Bethesda is not here to give us the superior game. Bethesda is here to make money. They don't care about making the greatest game of all time. They're worried about making the most money possible of all time. Are we seeing the picture yet? Have I clearly represented Bethesda's goals yet? Sure, Skyrim was a game of the year. Sure, Oblivion was a game of the year. Sure, Morrowind was a game of the year, but how couldn't they have been? You could have taken almost any idiot and started them off with Daggerfall and said, make 3 sequels of Daggerfall and each time dumb it down a little bit. They would have been games of the year too. It's maybe I'm belittling Todd Howard a little bit. I think Todd Howard is a fairly decent programmer, but Todd Howard did not have Julian LeFay's drive. Todd Howard was very he was a yes man for the corporate side of Bethesda. He's the game director that the corporate side can say, now don't get lost putting in too many features because that doesn't make us a lot of money. Just get that game out by this date and, make sure the graphics are good because that's what matters. And well, that's the other thing is graphics are getting along a little long in the tooth now for Bethesda because they've been so unwilling to upgrade their engine. And that used to be their bread and butter, the graphics. So at some point, they're going to have to do an engine upgrade. There's almost no way around that. But I don't expect it to happen with Elder Scrolls 6, especially with Elder Scrolls 6 now coming in 2019. It's obvious that Elder Scrolls 6 is the bailout. It's the game to, well, cover the losses of Fallout 76. It's the game to hurry up and get out and make some money because they've had some bad releases in 2018. I really don't think they were planning to have Elder Scrolls 6 release in 2019. I totally expected, more like 2021 would have been where they would have wanted Elder Scrolls 6 to be released, but they're going to rush Elder Scrolls 6 out because of the failures of the last couple of games, which just goes to show how they don't learn. They haven't learned from their most recent failures. But I digress. So, check out Indigo Gaming's video about pretty much the entire history of the Elder Scrolls franchise and how it's gone from its birth to what it is now. Don't get too hyped for Elder Scrolls 6 because we know it's not going to be as complex as Skyrim, because we know Bethesda's track record of streamlining each subsequent game, we know that it's not going to be as robust as Skyrim because, again, it's another thing that they do. They slowly dumb down each title. So if you enjoyed Skyrim, you will clearly see that this next Elder Scrolls 6 will not be as complex or as robust as Skyrim was. Will Elder Scrolls 6 be a bad game? I guess that's the question on everyone's mind, right? I don't know. I think it's harder for the games that have survived off of graphics to do so. Bethesda and Elder Scrolls has been a game series that has kind of stunned the audience with the visuals. And for that reason, I've always been frustrated by Elder Scrolls on a whole. It felt like it catered to the, forgive the term, graphics wars. And with their inability to create a new engine, it's going to be very difficult for them to cater to that audience with Elder Scrolls 6. Graphically, I'm sure it'll be fine for me. I don't need intense graphics. I want game complexity. I want you know, the innards to make the game fun, not the graphics. There's so much more to a game than graphics. But Skyrim, or not Skyrim, but Elder Scrolls has made a living off of the graphics. They've made a living off of the storytelling. They've made a living off of taking all the parts of the game I like and throwing them out the door. I doubt this trend is going to change. So, what are they going to do with Elder Scrolls 6? They're not going to have a new engine. They're going to have the same crappy engine, which means their graphics are not going to be hugely increased from Skyrim. Which basically says their strengths that they've been living off of are decreasing. They're not as strong. So without the wow factor from graphics, and with the horrible lacking of content and complexity, because they've thrown it out the door for so long, what is going to be there to make Elder Scrolls 6 another game of the year? I don't think there's going to be anything there to make a game of the year. In fact, I do predict that Elder Scrolls 6 is going to be the first Elder Scrolls to not be game of the year. Will it make money? Yes. I believe it's going to make money. I believe it will be a profitable release for Bethesda. And I believe that's all that Bethesda really cares about at this point, is making some profit off of it. I think Bethesda is kind of desperate right now. The question is, what is Bethesda going to do after Elder Scrolls 6? Are they going to realize that they have run Fallout and Elder Scrolls into the ground? Are they going to realize that they have to become innovative? Are they going to realize that their lust for profit has gotten in the way of keeping their games relevant? They've had it pretty easy because the games they've been coasting on, well, they started at such a high bar that it was easy to coast on games with such a high bar. But it's almost amazing that they've taken that high bar and they've sunk it so low. The bar isn't what it used to be. The dream of Daggerfall isn't even close to ever being done. Skyrim does not come anywhere near close to being the game that it should be compared to Daggerfall. If we compare all of these games to Daggerfall, and Daggerfall's ambition, its scope, its intent, what it set out to achieve, and what it was trying to be at the time that it was, all these games suck. Hardcore. They don't even compete. They're not even in the same ballpark. No, all the games that came after Daggerfall, well, they've had graphics. And that's not even that big of a deal. I mean, it is and it isn't. So I'll admit it's kind of hard to go back and play Daggerfall on the graphics. Even a person like me that doesn't care about graphics so much, when you play a Morrowind or Oblivion and then you go and play Daggerfall and you're back on those old graphics, and it's just like, oh, why can't there be new graphics in Daggerfall? And you just start banging your head against a wall thinking about what should have been. Well, that's what Elder Scrolls is. That's the story of Elder Scrolls for me. Elder Scrolls is a story of what should have been. What Skyrim should have been, what Oblivion should have been, what Morrowind should have been, if they would have continued on the same effort and scale and dream that Daggerfall was. But they did not. And I'm not to say that, how do I put this? So, Daggerfall almost killed Julian Le Fay, according to Julian Le Fay. He put so much effort into the game, it almost physically killed him. I'm not saying that they needed to do that level of effort. If they put in 75% of the effort Julian Le Fay put in with each subsequent title, it would be amazing what Elder Scrolls would be at this point in time. Just amazing. But they didn't. They put in far less amount of effort than what Julian Le Fay put in. They streamlined Elder Scrolls so much in an effort to make money. So, less hours you put in, the less you need to pay. When the game sells, that's more profit. That is the key to Bethesda. That is what Bethesda cares about. Bethesda does not care about making the greatest video game of all time. Bethesda cares about making money. And in the end, that is why Elder Scrolls 6 is not going to be the game that many might be hyping it up to be, because Bethesda is not capable of making a game for the sake of making a game good. They are in the business of making a game to make themselves money. I'm James Johnson. This is my channel. These are my opinions about the Elder Scrolls franchise. Daggerfall was the pinnacle of that for me. Some of you may feel differently. Some of you may think Morrowind was the pinnacle, or Oblivion was the pinnacle, or Skyrim even could be the pinnacle for some of you. And I don't dispute that they all have their own personal merits. And you're welcome to your opinions. But for me, I do believe that a different level of effort was put into Daggerfall than the other subsequent games. And I know in my gut that Skyrim could have been so much more. Morrowind could have been so much more. Oblivion could have been so much more. But they made weird choices. They made weird choices to gut their game. They made weird choices to streamline their game. And they proudly called these good changes. They proudly talked about it when they were hyping up their games, of how they streamlined the game and cut out stuff that they thought was not important. Dumb down the game and make it less complex, because that makes a great game. Anyway, as I was saying, I'm James Johnson. This is my channel. I hope you appreciate my videos. I'll get off my soapbox and I'll end this video. Have a great day and peace.